7 of the Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Like that.
Oh, okay.
So Jay-Z's mentor, rap mentor at the time, was a guy named Jazz. He was a member of this Ansar Rule community, which was a very black, almost orthodox type of Muslim. Like they used to wear white robes and all that type of stuff, and they used to be on the train selling oils and stuff like that. So he's been exposed to stuff like that, and that's way more radical than what you're talking about. Since he was a kid.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think there's a lot of reasons why he would marry Beyonce. I mean, she was a beautiful woman. Like, she was on top of her game.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر
I'm going to talk about the Moors. Now, the topic of the Moors for black people, especially here in America, could be a touchy subject, especially right now we're in the age of information. You know, a lot of people are claiming Moors heritage, and I just want to put this out there. I'm not here to bash anyone. I'm not here to bash a Moor, and I'm not here to bash any Muslims. What I'm here to do is state the truth about history. Now, when I say state the truth about history, I'm going to state what's been written about history, and we can try to back it up with consistencies as it relates to what's happened moving forward. So when I speak about the Moors, understand that the Moors come from the Islamic stock, from Muslims. Where does the religion of Islam begin? It begins with the Prophet Muhammad. Discussing Islam and getting into history, discussing the Prophet Muhammad, I just want to make sure that you guys understand that when we're talking about religion, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. We're not here to try to segregate ourselves from a segment of the population, but as a lot of followers have been asking me, they want to know, hey, can you give us a little bit of history on the, basically on the background of Islam? First and foremost, Muhammad was a prophet. I'm going to tell you who exactly told Muhammad he was a prophet. But before I tell you who told Muhammad was a prophet, let's get into the love story of Muhammad and Khadijah. So Khadijah was Muhammad's wife, and for any devout Muslim out there, they're probably familiar with the story of Muhammad and Khadijah. Muhammad and Khadijah were married when Muhammad was 25, Khadijah was 40. Now, contrary to what you think about most, Islamic marriages, Khadijah had actually been married 3 times prior to her marrying Muhammad. Furthermore, Khadijah was wealthy. She was incredibly influential. Here's what is not written in the words of history. Khadijah was a devout Catholic who had donated the majority of her money to the Catholic Church and had close ties to the Pope. Now, how do we know this? When I look through all of these pages in history, you don't really see much about the relationship between Khadijah and the Catholic Church, so we have to read in between the lines. See, that's where the truth is. The truth isn't in the words, because if you go look at any, propagated version of the story of Muhammad and Khadijah and their love story, it has nothing to do with her relationship between her and the Pope, and basically her and her cousin Warraq. Now, we're going to talk about Warraq here in a second, but who was Khadijah? She was a wealthy woman of substantial means, and she sought out Muhammad to be the Arab Messiah. Now, how could someone say such a thing? When I say she sought out Muhammad to be the Arab Messiah, I am basically quoting the words of a Jesuit priest who was poisoned after regurgitating the words of another Jesuit, Augustine Bey, who basically said that the Vatican created Islam. Now, let's just pretend like Augustine Bey didn't say anything about the Vatican creating Islam or that they sent Khadijah to find a Arab Messiah. Let's just look at what actually happened. So, Khadijah herself was an Arab, okay? Muhammad himself, of course, was of the Mecca stock. His grandfather was one of the nobles of some tribes in Mecca, and eventually he became more prominent as his relationship with Khadijah became more mainstream. He was a merchant / shepherd who flipped a few bricks for Khadijah on the road. She was like, damn, who is this Muhammad nigga? Like, this nigga fresh. Basically, that's what happened. So, Muhammad had earned a reputation for being like one of the most honest and had the highest integrity of any shepherd in the land at the time during the trade when Arabs were becoming more, prominent in the trade routes, especially between Syria and the Middle East and Europe, when they started picking up trade, especially as Rome and the Christians became more divided in their doctrine. Now, I want to rewind something really quick that a follower hit me up with the other week. When I say that Christianity wasn't technically a religion, understand that people have been following the quote-unquote Jesus doctrine for a long time, but it wasn't until 1452 in the New Testament when all Christians could agree upon the Jesus doctrine and stop warring amongst each other. Because before then, Catholics and Christians, variations of Christianity, were all at war trying to decide basically was Jesus a human or man or whatever. But we're going to go a little step further, because why are we even talking about Jesus? Well, did you know that the Prophet Muhammad actually acknowledged Jesus? Now, he didn't acknowledge Jesus as the Son of God or necessarily an idol, but he was like, yeah, this nigga Jesus is cool. I guess he's a prophet or whatever. Now, the Muslim Holy Land doesn't even work without the New Testament. And before we get into the wars between Christians and Muslims, let's just get back to the story of Khadijah and Muhammad. So Khadijah and Muhammad were married for, a little bit of time until Khadijah died, because she was much older. But during this time, she was extremely influential. She was a woman of nobility. She had very close ties to Rome. This allowed Muhammad to get the influence among the Arab people. See, what's not being told in history is the fact that someone had to proclaim Muhammad a prophet and divine. Now, who was this person that said, hey, you know what? You are that nigga. Who was that? It was Khadijah's brother, or actually it wasn't her brother. It was her cousin. It was Khadijah's cousin. His name was Warraq. So Warraq, who just happened to be a Catholic priest, he was also studying Catholicism and Judaism at the time. He said that during one of Muhammad's cave revelations. Now, I'm not going to get into the entire story of Muhammad, but I'm going to paraphrase the story. So Muhammad had gone into a cave, had a revelation with an angel, came back, said, hey, kind of flipped out, like he went crying to his wife Khadijah, like, hey, baby, I saw some shit, baby, I don't know what it was. And then Khadijah told her cousin, or I think it was her cousin, told her cousin Warraq. Warraq said, oh shit, he saw the angel? He saw Gabriel. That's the same nigga Moses saw. Oh man, listen, let me tell you, man, this nigga Muhammad's divine. Now that's what's written, okay? So really the first person to proclaim Muhammad's divinity was Warraq. And who was Warraq? Warraq was an Augustinian Catholic priest. And when I say Augustinian Catholic priest, let's take it a step further. What's also not written in history? Well, Muhammad studied the works of St. Augustine. So Muhammad studied the works of St. Augustine, and his divinity was proclaimed by Warraq, the cousin of his wife Khadijah, who just happened to be a Catholic priest. But they're also hiding Khadijah's dedication to the Pope. Something that's not written in history is Khadijah's dedication to the Pope. Now, when I say Warraq was a Catholic priest, he was a Nestorian priest. He was a Nestorian priest. So who was Nestorius? So during the early centuries of Christianity and Christ doctrine, the big argument among Europeans was trying to decide whether or not Jesus was man or was he God. So Nestorius actually argued against the godly divinity of Christ and just argued that Christ was a prophet. Of course, this doesn't go over well with a lot of Christians who actually say Christ and God are one. By virtue, Jesus created the universe. So, and a lot of Christians don't even understand that. Christianity they try to make it, in a sense, monotheistic because Jesus is the idol. But once again, Jesus is an idol. And it's actually understood that he does have a father, yet you pray and bow to the Son. And interestingly enough, that's probably the same fuckery that's probably getting Christians caught up in the, multiple Christianity doctrine for years. And honestly, I think separates, true Gentiles from true believers is whether or not a person or flesh idol would ever be sent in replacement of the Most High. So there really is just a dichotomy in how people think of their interpretation of God. So when I say that Warraq was a Nestorian priest, all I mean to say is Warraq was a Christian. He fell under the Christ doctrine. he fell up under the Archbishop of Constantinople, which fell under the jurisdiction of New Rome. And we know exactly who New Rome is, the papacy. And the papacy are the exact same people who were running the Islamic faith. So, in discussing the Augustinian monks who were actually training the Prophet Muhammad, before he became this ordained prophet through the Catholic Church, he was getting trained by Augustinian priests. For what reason? What happened after Muhammad was proclaimed a divine prophet under Rome? Well, Muhammad and these quote-unquote Muslim Arabs now had something to fight for. So they initiated the crusades that would happen between Christians, non-Catholic Christians, and Muslims for centuries. So when we're talking about dating and the life of Muhammad versus when the Quran was created versus when the Moors invaded Europe, let's put it all in context. Muhammad existed sometime around 570. The Quran somewhere around 633. Well, the Moors ransacked Europe in 711, 713, so less than 100 years after the Quran had been created and the death of Muhammad. The Moors had ransacked Europe. When I say the Moors and I describe the Moors, understand I am exclusively talking about Arab Muslims, especially the Arab Muslim territories surrounding the North African Iberian Peninsula Horn. I'm not talking about those guys with the fez who you see in later pictures. I'm not talking about those Moors. Those are the later, more Europeanized Moors. These Moors really were more Muslim Arab. They were a little more Ottoman Turk in stock. Okay? So around 711 through the early 700s, the Moors invaded Europe. But what else also happened around the same fucking time? These Khazarians, who were forced into becoming Christians or Muslims, because, you know, Muslims a thing now, they become Jews. Now, according to the testimony of Augustine Bey and the other Jesuit priest, I think his name was Rivera, another Jesuit priest. According to the testimony of Cardinal Bey, apparently Jerusalem was it was in such a strategic location that the Christians needed it. And they wanted to have it because it was in the perfect location, because it was like right there in the middle of the Holy Land. And they thought if they could get Jerusalem right there, you know, they would be able to dominate the region for centuries. Now, that's Jerusalem right there where they say it is. I looked at a map from 1570 and I actually see Jerusalem on the map. You know how I like to go look at old maps. And I know that apparently Jerusalem wasn't created until 1948, or Israel, that fake ass Israel wasn't created until 1948. But there you see Jerusalem in the map, on a map from 1570, which can easily be explained. It's the old throw off. If Jerusalem is on the map from 1570, then who were the Jews? Were the Jews the Ishmaelites that the Catholics referred to as Ishmaelites? Well, we know they weren't the Khazarian Ashkenazi Jews who now inhabit the area and call it their motherland. We know that for a fact. Okay? So, if Jesus existed in these, let's say Jesus did exist, right? Because at some point, we're not talking about Christianity. We're talking about Islam. But, Islam doesn't exist without Jesus. And we'll get into that. So let's just talk about this area that they call the Holy Land that really wasn't even called Israel until 1948, that apparently the Jews of England took Palestine for, which originally was going to be Uganda, if you guys don't remember that. And so Jerusalem's almost this fictional place in a lot of people's minds. Just like what was Columbus looking for in 1492 if he was looking for Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was right there, and those quote-unquote European Jews didn't even claim Jerusalem. I mean, they could have taken that shit. I mean, the Spanish fleet, the Armada was huge, but they couldn't take on the quote-unquote old Ottoman Empire from the Arabs who they were quote-unquote in bed with. We're gonna get into that, but they couldn't take over the area. I mean, it was their area essentially. So I mean, what are you talking about? It's all some fucking bullshit. So let's just go back to 700 when the Moors, which are the Muslims, okay, the North African Muslims, some Ottoman Turk, but we know where Islam. Okay, we know where Islam derived from. It derived from the Prophet Muhammad. We know that the Prophet Muhammad was heavily influenced by Catholic priests, bishops, and cardinals, and we also know that he was proclaimed divine. So at the time that Muhammad was proclaimed a prophet by Warraq, the stories begin to spread throughout the Muslim areas of the Middle East and Europe, and especially around the quote-unquote Roman Ottoman Turkish Empire. They started spreading about this Messiah to the Arab people, who at the time were not particularly religious. Now remember, Muhammad went up in the Kaaba for Muslims. Muhammad went up into the Kaaba when there were a whole bunch of fucking idols, and he said, man, there's only one God, and he smashed all the fucking idols. That's what Muhammad did. So, even in terms of a prophet, I mean, Muhammad did lead some armies. I mean, Muslims and Christians went to war subsequently years and centuries later. As a matter of fact, it turned out that, it wasn't as though Muhammad was necessarily anti-Jesus. He was just anti-Christian, because from all historical accounts, he got along perfectly fine with the Roman Catholic Church. Why is that? Throughout history, when we hear about these crusades, there's often one person controlling two people or both sides. It's the old Hegelian dialectic. We see it throughout history. We've seen it all the time. So when we fast forward to the Moors, after the death of Muhammad, after the creation of the Quran, we know it's less than 100 years before these Moors take over Europe. And they take over Europe and they take over North Africa. And, the way history tries to put it, they say, hey, the Moors got out of control. And next thing you know, they're taking over Rome. Really? Really? The Moors took over Rome. See, that's the part of history that a lot of black people can identify with. They like to hear the stories about when black people ruled Rome. But here's what they don't like to hear. They don't like to hear that black people took on those same ideas. And eventually that mixing became the progenitor to the slave trade. They don't want to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that right now because we're just talking about history. And of course, there was an Arab-African slave trade, but we want to know how the slave trade affected us here, and not in the ways that you think they did as it affected Africans, okay? Arabs play their role. The Arabs play their role in deception just like the Jews, just like the quote-unquote European whites. Remember, this is all a fight for a motherland that was created in 1948, or so we think, because I see Jerusalem on a map from 1570. But how can that be? I mean, Columbus looked for Jerusalem in 1492. Did he not find it over here in the Americas? Or was this old Jerusalem? Is this Jerusalem part 2? They said Jerusalem fell to Rome in 70, right? Jerusalem fell to Rome in 70. Fell to Rome in 70, and then the Muslims came and they ransacked Jerusalem. And on top of the grave of the Virgin Mary, they built the Dome of the Rock. I mean, yes, the Kaaba's in Mecca, but the Dome of the Rock is in Jerusalem. So according to the testimony of Cardinal Bay, Rome was so bloodthirsty to control Jerusalem. And they wanted to control the motherland because it was so geographically influential that they would do anything. So they created an Arab Messiah. They created an Arab Messiah. And then what did they do? They built the Dome of the Rock on top of the remains of the Virgin Mary. Down the street, they have the Church of the Holy Scepter. Hold on, what? So, let me get this straight. The Dome of the Rock is built on top of the remains of the Virgin Mary? So is Jerusalem, or what you know as Jerusalem, is that the Jewish motherland? Or is that the Arab motherland? And why is that? Oh, shit. And why is that land called Israel? It wasn't called Israel before 1948. Although I still see Jerusalem on the map from 1570. Why is that? Jerusalem was sacked by Rome, then reconquered by the Muslims, but the Muslims were created by the Vatican. But what about Christopher Columbus? What was he looking for? Was he not looking for Jerusalem? Was that a lie? Now we know that the Khazarians became Jews around the same time that the Moors, which were a culmination of Arabs and the Berber tribes in the Africa area. We know that the Moors ruled Europe and actually, I guess, defeated the Roman Empire. Is that true? Did the Moors defeat the Roman Empire in 700? Around the same time that the Khazarians became Jews? One thing, when we're looking at history, you start to find intimate connections between certain groups of people and certain activities. So then you can start drawing parallels between what you think is true and what you know is not true. So, of course, at this point, we don't put anything past Rome. If you say that that's a legitimate Israel in 70 AD, if you say that's a legitimate Jerusalem in 70 AD that fell to Rome, then ransacked by the Muslims, did the Muslims get out of the control of Rome? What happened? Now let's go a step further, because the Middle East, when you think about the Middle East today, you think about, what they call Israel, and of course, I guess they just proclaimed the area that they call Jerusalem. I guess that's the official capital. What the fuck ever? Like, that shit matters. So they call that area like the official capital of Israel, right? Okay. People mentally attach this area like it's a predominantly Muslim part of the world. Here's what I contend. You know those Muslims in Saudi Arabia? Because Saudi Arabia is, other than Israel, is probably the most influential country and definitely the largest country, like right there in that small area in the Middle East. They control a lot of oil. They are the foot of the Persian Gulf. Saudi Arabia, in terms of those countries in the Middle East, got it going on. But who rules Saudi Arabia? Because most people think that Arab Muslims rule Saudi Arabia, but they don't. Those quote-unquote Arab Muslims are actually secret Jews. They're what you call Dawnme Jews or conversos, similar to Columbus, who apparently was a Jew, but also a Catholic. You see what's going on here? But we also know that these people aren't Jews. We know they're not Jews, right? Like, we know Columbus wasn't a Jew. Now, the Jews want this area right here, but we know that don't know Jews live there. They've been calling that Jerusalem, but don't know Jews live there. Where did those Jews go? Were they ever there? Is this the land of Scripture? I mean, is it the land of New Testament Scripture? Because when I look at the New Testament and you talk about Jesus walking the damn shores of the Sea of Galilee, you got to ask yourself, well, who built the goddamn Sea of Galilee? And was it really a sea? Because it's no bigger than Utah Lake. It's definitely not as big as Lake Michigan. I mean, even the model of the Holy Land looks like shit. But they want you to buy that. They are literally trying to fabricate history as they go. Well, if Jerusalem fell in 70 AD to the Romans, and then the Muslims took Jerusalem back over, without the Catholic Augustinian priest ordaining Muhammad, his cave revelations to Gabriel as divine, this religion isn't created. Without Khadijah, the widow of 3 husbands with kids who have all died, a prominent woman with ties to the Pope in Rome. Think about Eve. Think about how you don't think I'm just asking, and I'm not here to disrespect any Muslims. I hope y'all know that. But you don't think he was being manipulated by this woman? She sought him out. What part of the faith is that? She sought him out. A woman with children who have died, sons, with sons who have died. She was wealthy. A wealthy woman in a patriarchal society seeks out a young man. And then we cross-reference that with, the story of Augustine Bay and these Jesuit priests who, for lack of a better word, had no reason to lie, especially since one ended up poisoned. And they say, yeah, we were looking for a Messiah for the Islamic faith. And Khadijah knew exactly who to go get. This little Muhammad nigga from Mecca. He's a herder. He's a great guy. Great at business. We'll start writing legend behind him. You don't think they did that? You don't think they did that? So the Moors started taking over Europe less than 100 years after the creation of the Quran? I mean, fuck. The Christians couldn't even take over the Americas. It took them to goddamn 1776 to take over the entire Americas. Like, they got areas, but I mean, it took them a long fucking time. After the New Testament. Meanwhile, Iraq was fucking translating versions of the New Testament in goddamn 585 and fucking 623. So Iraq was translating from Greek to Arabic versions of the New Testament in the year 615 or 620. Meanwhile, the goddamn Pope didn't see the New Testament till 1456. Now, granted, that was the Gutenberg press, but remember, Christians hadn't even decided whether Jesus was man or God yet. That didn't happen until the New Testament. Meanwhile, the advisor to Muhammad is already translating the shit from Greek to Arabic. This is supposedly damn near 1,000 years before 1456. The relationship between Muhammad and Khadijah is a relationship that really has to be analyzed further. A lot of those connections to the church begin right there. This woman, 15 years, the senior to the Prophet of Islam. Her cousin, Waraq, the Catholic priest, also studying Judaism. Now remember, Christianity is it was derived from Judaism. Paganized Judaism. Judaism religiousized Torah.
This rapper began wearing this chain. And when TMC noticed the iconic MC wearing the necklace, they assumed the symbols represented the Illuminati.
Is this Illuminati symbol?
Yes, rumors have circled for years that Jay-Z is a member of the secret society that supposedly runs the world. And this necklace may be the proof we've all been looking for.
It looks like a sun or a compass with a 7 in it.
And as it turns out, TMC was absolutely wrong. This is the universal flag of the 5% Nation, aka the nation of gods and earths, or the 5%ers. And it wasn't the first time that the symbol was used by a celebrity. You got Rakim, Big Daddy Kane, Wu-Tang Clan, KRS-One, Brand Nubian, Poor Righteous Teachers, even Carmelo Anthony have all openly worn the flag. And then you have rappers like Nas, Nelly and the Saint Lunatics, LL Cool J, AZ, Busta Rhymes, Diggable Planets, Talib Kweli, Nori, Guru and DJ Premier, and even singer Erykah Badu. These artists and more have all acknowledged at some point having been influenced by 5% teachings and culture.
African big rider, poor righteous teacher, got within myself, so what maybe a 5%.
Radios on card tables, Benetton and Guards building. Ask for today's mathematics, we are lost children, and this was going.
Psalm 83. Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom and the Ishmaelites, of Moab and the Hagarenes, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, Asser also is joined with them. They've holpen the children of Lot. Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and like Zeb, yea, all their princes as Zebah and as Zalmunna, who said, Let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession.